Okay, welcome to Blender Project Part 3. This will be the project section where we'll create some new objects, we'll animate them, add color, texture, and add an image. Alright, to get started, you can see that I have a cube here. Let's create a few other objects. Just out of curiosity, let's look at a torus. So we'll go create a torus. Here's my torus, grab it out of the space. Use the S key to scale that down just a little bit so it's not too big. Also going to scale down my cube a little bit. This requires 5 objects. And we'll go ahead and create a few objects. Now, in your own projects, I want you to be more creative and spend some time shaping your objects, obviously, for maximum credit. But this is really more a tutorial in order to teach you how to animate the objects and how to position them than it is on how to modify the objects themselves. Of course, modifying objects, as you've seen in class, is pretty straightforward. We can go from object mode into edit mode, take an object, and at this point you can individually select points on an object and then grab those points and move them and scale them and turn an object into anything that you'd like. For instance, like this. Take a sphere and turn it into a sphere with a spike on it with a couple clicks of the mouse, and then if we rotate that object around, you can see that it is in fact a funny sphere with a little leg coming off. So if you create 3 of those legs, you've now created a sphere on a stand. So you can do whatever you'd like to do in that regard. Okay, so here are a couple objects. That's 2. Let's throw a monkey in. Hopefully not a monkey wrench, just a monkey. We'll scale monkey down a little bit and rotate them around for maximum effect. You can see my camera location here, so my camera's looking in this direction. So if I grab my monkey, bring him over to the side a little bit, I may choose to do a rotation in order to have the monkey looking a little bit more at the camera. So, quick render of an image just to see where we are. There are my objects. Okay, I don't actually like the angle the camera is at relative to the object, so we'll mosey over here to the right hand side. If this toolbar doesn't already exist, click the little plus symbol that will be up in the top right to expand it out. I'm going to click on Lock Camera to View. Lock Camera to View will allow me to go back and render my image. Okay, see where my objects are? I don't like that location. Hit the escape key, get out of the render. Now what I'd like to do is go down to the View menu, go to Camera View. What Lock Camera to View means is once I'm here, if I click my middle mouse button and drag my mouse around, I'm actually moving the camera and its view around. So I can center my objects. So this keeps the camera locked in the view. Shift in the middle mouse button allows me to pan up and down and left and right. So I get those objects in the center a little bit. And I don't want to zoom in on them because we're going to animate them. Okay. Now I'm satisfied with that position. I'll go back into my standard ortho perspective views. Click that one more time to go into perspective from ortho. I prefer that. Okay. And I'll rotate around so we can see what we're doing. Alright, there are my objects once again. Let's create one more object. How about a cylinder? Cylinders are always nice. So we'll create a cylinder, we'll scale that down. Okay. Now the first thing that we'd like to do is take a few objects and group them together so that they'll do something interesting. Okay, so for instance, I might take my cube, scale it up just a tad. Okay. I might take my cylinder and scale it down just a tad. And align this cylinder somewhere roughly on the top. I'll go down to View and then pick Toggle Quad View so I can see where my cylinder is relative to my cube from different vantage points. I'll go down here to the bottom. I'll pick my Translate tool I'll then go over here and move my cylinder so that it looks like it's at the top of my cube, and move it down so it's sitting on top of the cube, just barely on top of the cube. Okay, see from this vantage point, here it looks more or less centered. I can move it just a touch. In this view, it's not quite centered, so I'll move it on the y-axis. So it's centered there. And now you can see it's centered top and bottom here. It's centered all the way around, sitting right on top of my cube. Alright, now what I'd like to do is take my cylinder and rotate it 90 degrees, for instance. So let's go over here to our transforms, rotation. And I'd actually like to rotate it about the x-axis to make it sit on its side. Just for an interesting effect, 90 degrees. There it is. Now what I have is a cylinder, as you can see, is sitting on top of my cube. Right? Just laying there. Okay. Now what I'd like to do is take my cylinder and bind it to the cube, so when the cube moves, the cylinder moves. To do that, we go up here to this top corner, left click and hold on the orange triangle on the cylinder, and then we drag that on top of the cube and let go. You'll notice that the cube now has a plus sign out here. Click on the cube, you have the cube properties, and the cylinder is attached to the cube. If you click on this, you'll also get the cylinder properties. So that binds the cylinder to the cube. So when the cube moves, the cylinder will move. The cylinder can move independent of the cube, but the cube cannot move without the cylinder moving. Okay, so that's the first thing that I wanted to do there. Alright, so now imagine that we'd like to go back to our regular view. And actually, let's go to the camera view. And let's right select on the cube, grab him, and drag him over this way. Alright. So simple version of animation. What if I chose to take this cube and cylinder combination and I want to move it across the screen? Okay. That is the first thing that we'll want to do. Okay. So to do that, we go down to our time menu. Here's our time menu. It's a little bit difficult to see, but this area in here is lighter gray. This area out here is darker gray. First thing that I'd like to do to modify this is go up to the properties, render properties window, and I'd like to change my end frame. So here we'll do 24 frames a second for 5 seconds, so that is 120 frames. And that's what the project requires. So I change the end frame to 120, leave the start frame at 1. And it may be, again, hard to see, but now this is the end of my time scale. That's the 120 mark. And down here is the beginning of my time scale. Okay, so I want to move my object around. First thing I do is pick the time I want it to start, which in this case is at time 0. I move this article to the position I want it to start in, which I already did. I then move to the left side to the animation tool and click Insert, Location. So that's insert a keyframe. I'm only going to be translating this across the screen, so we change location. Okay. So that inserts the keyframe. There's a little yellow bar there. Now what I have to do is pick the time that I want it to stop moving, which let's say that's 120 seconds. I now need to move my object to where I'd like it to stop at. So this is a 3D space. Right, so I'm going to actually make it move diagonally across the screen and further away from us. Okay. And I picked the final location for it. I picked the final time for it. Now all I have to do is insert the location keyframe again. With this done, I can roll my mouse back down to the bottom where there's a play button, a backwards and forwards play button, fast forward and reverse. Click on play, and you'll see my object moving through my camera view in the top right corner, just as we specified. Right, to stop the movement, hit escape, If I'd like to see my scene at any given point in time, simply click on the time bar at that time and you'll see where the object is. So there's my object at time 0. If I click here, see my object here, my objects have moved. Okay, so one more time I'll show you hit the play button so that it moves, and up here is in the camera view the motion that we just made occur, looping over and over again. There it is. Okay. Escape to stop that. All right, that gives us a very simple motion. I'll set my time scale back to 0. Now we'll move up and colorize a couple objects. That's always important. So let's pick our cube, go over to material, add a color to the cube. Let's make the cube dark blue. Okay. Let's go over, pick our cylinder, and let's make our new cylinder color. Oh, actually, let's leave the cylinder white. Okay. Pick our monkey, give it a color, give the color a little bit of a happy monkey color, maybe. What color does a monkey want to be? That looks like a good monkey color. Alright. Now let's pick our sphere. Quickly add a color to that. And our torus. We'll add a color to that. Okay, so now everything has a color. We can also add textures if we'd like to do so. So to add textures, you can go up and add, with this texture mapping, you can add an image or you can add a texture. So let's see if there are any interesting types of textures here. Wood is probably not that interesting for a monkey, but maybe it would be appropriate. Oh, let's see. Okay, let's add a wood texture to the monkey. So it'll make it look like it was somewhat carved out. So you can see what that will look like. Of course, it's using a little bit of a strange array of colors that we can adjust, and it's mapping this in whatever way we would like it to be. So we can pick some different colors here, make it look a little bit more of a mixed color. Decrease the intensity a little bit. Put it more in that space. Okay. Now let's see what our monkey looks like when we render. Okay, you can see what the monkey looks like now in our rendering. Looks like a nice woody colored with some wood pattern grain to it. So we just added a nice texture to our monkey. Okay. With that done, the next step of our process is to make something scale. So let's take our monkey. There's our monkey. Let's make him scale. Actually, let's move him over here a little bit and get him out of the way. And then let's scale him. So let's hit the scale button, start our scale as a very small monkey. Very small monkey. At time 0, insert a keyframe for scaling, so that we must scale an object. Okay, so that's the starting time frame. And let's just say halfway through, we're going to make it, let's say this time, a little more than halfway through, we'll make the monkey's face get bigger. So now I set my time, I go up with my object, hit the scale key, the S key to scale monkey. Okay. And then we're going to scale monkey to about that big. Left click to set that. So now I have the new scale size, I have the new scale time, so I insert the scaling keyframe for the monkey. Okay, now if we go back down and play, see what we've created, hit play, and you'll see the scaling monkey and the translating cube and cylinder. There they are. Alright, so back down here to the time scale, go back to time 0. The next thing I'd like to do is I'd like to move this viewpoint so I can see the cylinder from directly on top. And what I'd like to do is select the cylinder, and I'd like to animate the cylinder by making it rotate. And so in the time frame that it goes sliding across the screen, I'd like it to rotate a full 360 degrees about 5 times. Okay, so to do that, what I have to do is pick my starting time frame, my starting rotation, and insert a rotation keyframe. Pick the time I want it to stop rotating, which in this case is the 120th frame. Okay, I'd like to then rotate it around many times. I can do this by hitting the R key and then moving my mouse around the circle. And now, of course, in my view window here, I lost my cylinder because it slid off the screen. So I'm simply repositioning my view, not the object, so I can see my object again. All right, so here's the object that we moved. So what I can do is now hit the R key and rotate this several times and then insert the keyframe. Or when I do that, you will notice over here the rotation is now in green. Because I set a rotation keyframe, it is now waiting for me to set the final rotation values, which are simply numbers. Alright, so the axis that I want to rotate around is the z-axis, and I'd like to rotate around about 5 times. So here's one way to do that. On this view, hit the R key and rotate. Now watch as I rotate. See if you look over here, it's going to look a little bit strange because the mouse is supposed to follow my pointer, but I don't think you're going to be able to see it quite. But if you look at the very right hand side of your screen, the z-axis rotation, now there's a number there, and as I'm rotating this object, that number gets bigger and smaller. Okay, so I could simply rotate around several times this way and accumulate rotation numbers over here. But what I actually prefer to do in this case is simply type in the number of degrees on the z-axis I would like this thing to rotate. So 5 times 360 is what, 1500, 1800? 1800 degrees. So I type in 1800 and I hit enter. Okay. Now I've set my time, the amount of rotation, so I insert my rotation keyframe. Okay, so we'll go down here and hit play, and then I'll let you see what that looks like. In fact, I'll adjust the display just a little bit. So hopefully you can see that. And we have several different views zoomed out to different levels from different perspectives here, so this gives you a bit of an idea. If I hit escape, Control Alt Q to get out of quad view mode. So here's our camera mode, so you can see it a little bit better, and play it again. You can see I just created a cylinder that's spinning around on top of my object that's moving. Alright, hit the escape key, pick time 0 again. Okay, I'll go back into a regular viewpoint. Here's our camera view, camera direction. Here's my object moving through space, and now I can show you in different points in time where the objects will be. Let's look down a little bit so you see what the camera vantage point looks like. Okay, so the camera's here, shining on these objects, and as I scrub across the bottom, you can see what our moving object is doing. Okay, so it's spinning around. Alright, so the next thing I like to do is put a plane somewhere in the background, and I want this plane to be perpendicular to the camera so it acts like a backdrop. So it's the scene that sits behind, so it's kind of like you would the backdrop of a theater. It sits behind all of the objects. So to do that, we create a plane. So here's my plane. All right, I'd like to move this plane so it's well behind all the objects, so I can. Don't worry about the angle that the plane sits at this point in time. That's not really terribly important. Right now, all I want it to do is be behind the objects, a reasonable distance. All right, so there it is. Now, one way to orient this is to look at your camera, just middle mouse button, scroll around, shift middle mouse button, move it up. And just keep playing around with this until you are looking through the camera, essentially, towards the plane, and then rotate and orient the plane. Then you can go into your Control-Alt-Q, so into your quad view, and then you can perfect the orientation of that plane. Okay, so that's one way to do this. I'm going to show you a little more sophisticated method for doing it. So with my plane selected, let's roll over here to our menu of property items, and let's pick the one that looks like a chain. Okay, this one is called constraints. I'll click on constraints. I'll add a constraint called a damped track. A damped track means that I'm going to bind the plane to another object, and the plane will then track that object. Okay, so what I'm really doing is in a way grouping them together from an orientation point of view. Okay, so damped track. I'll pick my target is my camera, and the axis I would like it to target is the z-axis of the camera. Okay, so camera, z-axis. Now if we scroll over here, you'll notice something interesting already. Here's my camera, here's my plane. My plane is already flipped up and over and is looking towards my camera. So now if I rotate our viewport a little bit, you'll see what the plane has done is the plane has made itself point at the camera. Okay, so that is done, and it will stay that way. So now what happens, this is pretty neat stuff, if I right click on the camera now and I grab the camera and I move the camera, notice what the plane is doing. It's keeping the face of the plane pointed at the camera no matter where the camera is. Okay, so it's going to follow that camera around. All right, so you never have to worry about the plane not pointing at the camera anymore. All right, so that takes care of that. Now what we have to do is perhaps go into view camera mode and realize our plane is not rotated properly to our camera, and it certainly is not big enough to fill in as a backdrop. So we'll click on it, we'll go down here to our S key, hit S key to scale it, and we'll scale it up, R key to rotate it, and we'll just do a simple rotation. Okay. Alright, so now I'll go down and use our axes scale button, click on that, go up, and I'll make it wider. Use the G key to grab it and move it around a little bit. Okay. Use the rotation key to allow me to rotate it just a touch. Okay. Scale key just to scale it uniformly up so it's just about there. And then I'll use the blue axis scale key just to make it a little bit taller so that it completely fills my backdrop. Alright, so now let's render our image. Alright, so this is our rendered image at that time. If I move to another time and a re-render, you'll see the objects are in a different place because they're moving. Okay. And hopefully I put the plane far enough back that the object doesn't run into it, so it doesn't. It looks good. Alright. So I'm pretty satisfied with that. I'd really like my cylinder to be a better color of white. So let's pick our cylinder, pick our white, and let's pick the intensity here as 1. And then re-render. So I'm going to render by hitting the F12 key. And that's still not quite as bright as I wanted it. but that's all right. We can do this. All right. Do it as pure white as I can. All right. Yeah. It's not very well lit, which is why it appears a little bit more gray than we might like. Okay, so there are our objects. We have two objects connected to each other, one rotating. The combination of the two are translating. So that meets the criteria in our template so far. We have to create another. We have to add another object to this, and we also have to add a moving light source. So what I'll do is I'll make my third object to add here a light source that will therefore be moving. Okay, and then we have our scaling object. So we have an objects translating, scaling, rotating, and we have three objects grouped together that are moving together, one of which is rotating. So I've met all of those criteria in this very simple example. I do expect yours to be a little bit more creative and spend a little more time putting together the details, but this gives us a pretty good idea of what we want to do and how to do it. All right, so view, back into a regular view mode. I could take a look at this cylinder here. What I'd like to do is turn this cylinder into a rotating spotlight. So now what I'll do is I will add my create lamp a spotlight. Okay, so now I've just put into my scene a spotlight. Let me hit the G key to grab it. Here's my spotlight. You can see the spotlight is not rotated so that it's pointing to the left or the right. It's actually pointing down. I'd like it to point to the left or the right. Okay, so the first thing I would like to do is rotate this. All right, the easiest way to do this accurately would be to rotate it along, say, the y-axis by 90 degrees. So here I'll type 90, and that, you can see, changes the orientation quite a bit. If I change our perspective a little bit so that we're looking straight on the edge of the cube, you will now see that I just made the light source move from pointing down to pointing this direction, okay, which is what we wanted. All right, now what I'd like to do is grab it and move it over here to the cylinder. Okay, I'd like to see how close I am, so grab it again and move it over here. I think I'm going to have to put it here and then use my axes movement buttons to move it up, get it at the height that I want. I'd like it more or less in the center of my beautiful cylinder. Okay, so move it up a little bit, move it over a little bit, okay, and that looks nice. All right. So a little bit of magic manipulation here. I need to reorient myself. Okay, so these two things are not very well aligned. So now what I'm going to do is grab this point source from the top view here. Make sure that I have my spotlight selected. So I'm going to go to the scene, click on spotlight, look at this and see I have my spotlight set in the right location. And now it's pointing off to the side this way. I'd like it to be pointing off to the side this way. So I need to rotate it. So I hit the R key and I'm just dragging it around. Since I'm looking straight down, it's fairly precise. Let me get it to about where I want it. About there. Okay. So now what will happen is if I take this spotlight and I attach it to the cylinder, it will go rotating around the cylinder as the cylinder rotates, and it will flash on all of the objects in the scene. So now let's go drag that click on the yellow part, and drag the spot onto the cylinder. Not onto the cube, but onto the cylinder. All right. Now we have three objects grouped. Cube has been tied to the cylinder. The cylinder now has been tied to the spotlight. Okay. And to make sure the spotlight shows up nice and strong down in its properties, I'll increase this to a 3. This is the energy of the spotlight. This is how bright is the light. Increase that to a 3. Okay. All right. So now let's hit F12 and see what we've rendered. Okay. So that is what it looks like. And if we play it from this vantage point, you'll actually be able to see that spotlight move. So there it goes. Okay. All right. Then I'd like to look at adjusting some of the parameters for the spotlight a little bit further. So what I'll do is change the distance to 20. Yeah, actually the original 25 is about right. I don't think that's going too far. Inverse square means that it's going to fall off. That is, it's going to have less light at every square inch as it moves further away from the light, so that gives you a very realistic light. And what I was looking for is the size button, and I'd like to change the size a bit. All right. Okay, and I'd like to change the angle of the beam. So angle means how wide is a spot can be. I want this to be fairly narrow, so I'm going to change that. I'll decrease it from 45 to 22.25. All right, see, that makes it a little bit narrower. All right. Very good. So that is our scene. All right, one last thing that we were asked to do here is take our plane and add an image to it. So to do that, the first thing we have to do is click on the plane. Go over here to Materials, click New. Doesn't matter what you put on here, just click New. Then go to the checkerboard, which is the texture. Scroll up if you have to. Click New. Go down to where it says Image down here. So don't mess with this image or movie, just leave it alone. Down here you click Image and click Open. Don't click New, click Open. And go find yourself an image someplace. All right, let's see if I can find an image someplace. Do we have any images on this computer? That is the question. Not actually sure if I do. Okay, I think I found a picture here. Let's take a look at pictures. Here's one. All right, so there's my picture. Now, one trick is I did an open on my picture. Here's imported the picture. You can see it tiling. Now what I'd like to do is scroll down where it says Mapping, Coordinates, UV. Click on the UV and change this to Window. And this will make a nice uniform mapping of my picture onto my plane. Okay, so now let's scroll back over and do an F12 so you can render and see. Now what I have is my interstellar cubes on a background casting shadows with a light attached to my cylinder. All right. So the very last piece of work to be done is to kind of scrub the scene to look at things in different perspectives. Yeah, make sure that everything's doing what we want it to do. So we can see that it'll be flashing around a lot. All right. See if we like that. All right. Now what we need to do is go render this. Click on the camera icon. Go down and change your resolution here as per the instructions. I'm going to change mine for this one to a little bit different than your project requires, but in the template it tells you 2 different resolutions to set. All right, these are the resolutions that I wish to use at this point. Okay, and but yours has specific ones. You'll set 2 different values here. You must scroll down and pick a legitimate location. Did you see where I clicked there? Down here under output. This is the directory path. I like to turn off file extensions. Click on the open button and tell it exactly what I'd like it to save and to where. So I will pick a different location. I'd like to pick the documents location for this. Okay, and then I have to give it a file name. So my file name will be Blender Demo Part 3.mpeg, because that is the format I'm going to save in, is MPEG. I'm typing that in myself. Click accept. All right. Then very important, change PNG here to MPEG. All right. Make sure that you have color selected, because otherwise you might end up with something black and white. All right. So now we've got all of that set to the values we would like. All right. Now all I have to do is click the animation button, and then you'll see it going step by step through the process of animating. And as this goes, you get to see the light flashing in the background, the objects moving and scaling and rotating, and the light rotating and causing a flashing effect. So there I have completed my project. Once this saves, rendered again with the second resolution mentioned in the template, and upload everything to the wiki, and you are done. So congratulations, you've just created your first 3D animations.